Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Psychology of Persuasion, led by David Long. My name is Eliza Parrish. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for the Raymond A. Mason School of Business, and these webinars are offered as part of our commitment to provide alumni with opportunities for lifelong learning and development. I'm especially excited for this webinar. We have 300 people registered, but equally exciting people from 9 countries. So welcome to all of you logging in from all over the world. As a reminder, this audio comes through Audio Connect. There is no phone-in number. If you encounter problems, try logging out and back in. And now to introduce Professor Long. He received his PhD in organizational behavior from the University of Florida's Warrington School of Business Administration. He holds a BS in Business Administration from Presbyterian College and an MBA from the University of Florida. David's research examines various approaches to impression management, how employees use impression management to build their reputations, and how supervisors and coworkers react to these employees and their strategies. His work has appeared in several journals and books, including the Academy of Management Journal, Journal of Applied Psychology, Personal Psychology, and the Nature of Leadership. Prior to earning his PhD, David served in the U.S. Navy as a naval flight officer and worked in the Home Depot Business Department in store management. He currently serves in the U.S. Navy Reserves as a mission commander and a flight instructor. His areas of expertise are impression management, influence tactics, organizational justice, leadership, and I learned this morning, baseball.
All right, well, thank you, Eliza. It's like people are joining us, which is wonderful, and I'm looking at some of the opinion polls that have been posted, and it looks like a majority of us do think about the different types of persuasion techniques when we're trying to move our own opinions or agendas forward, which is good that we do think about it. And for those of us that don't, maybe we do so subconsciously based on our own gifts and skills. And I also see that there's a variety of different tactics that are used. I'm looking at the opinion poll, and although there's a variety, it looks like the predominance are focused around the fact that we try to get people to focus on either our expertise or that we're trustworthy sources, which is also wonderful because we're going to be touching on both of those attributes and ways that they can be effective when we're trying to communicate a point. So I'm going to minimize those polls. Wonderful. So Eliza introduced me. I am David Long, and my topic in my talk is going to be you as an influential brand, which is going to touch a lot on my research, which is steeped in social influence and impression management. But I really want to narrow and hone my focus today on talking about some specific strategies and skills that we can all employ in our everyday life, albeit whether it's in an organization or just in the normal walk of life where we can be more influential based on who we are and what we do. So again, I'm David Long, Assistant Professor of Organizational Behavior. My email is posted on the slides. I'm always available for questions or comments or just for people to check in and say hello. So please feel free to reach out to me. And yes, Eliza did mention that my prior experience is both with Home Depot and the Navy. I currently am in the Navy Reserves, and I put in there almost retired because I just crossed the 20-year threshold in my military career. So I'm getting close. So again, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. So my guess is that most of us at some point, just about every day, are trying to find ways that we can either influence or persuade others to see things the way that we're hoping that they see them. So you got to ask yourself, why would someone gladly say yes to you, agree with your idea, comply with one of your requests, see things from your point or vantage, and listen to your message? There are a litany of definitions of leadership, and they can really be synthesized or boiled down to one coherent point, which is leadership is quite simply the ability to influence other people. That's a neat, nifty, tight definition, but as most of us know, that is a lot harder to accomplish than we might think. So when we reflect back on those questions that we posed earlier, you might have said, well, maybe the reason that I can get someone to say yes to me or to comply with my requests is because of my gifted social skills. My guess is that some of you that answered that you don't consciously think about ways to persuade others may consider yourself a natural Tony Robbins when it comes to persuading and influencing others. Or others may have said, look, I'm the boss. My title, my authority gives me the right to get others to say yes to me or to comply with a request or to see things from my point of view. The problem is that might not be very applicable to today's environment. Here's the deal. Not all of us can be considered a, quote, natural influencer. I referenced Tony Robbins earlier. We can't all be that savvy and sophisticated when it comes to getting others to see our point of view or to say yes to one of our requests. And it's also no longer acceptable just to wield a stick in today's society. As organizations become more global, as we work in teams and cross partnerships, it's just not very realistic that we're going to be able to assert our authority when it comes to getting others to see our point of view when we're trying to influence and persuade them. Besides, as we know, the millennial generation, as they enter the workforce, if they're not happy with their work environment, they are not afraid to move, to switch careers or switch organizations. They don't feel the same sense of loyalty that my generation or even the generation that preceded me feels. So again, we're not all natural and gifted at being persuasive, and we can't just rely on our titles to get other people to see our point of view. Luckily, there is a science that suggests there are some key ways that we can get others to be persuaded to our point of view. At the end of the day, there are literally thousands of different strategies we can employ when we're trying to get others to say yes to one of our requests. But scientific research suggests that those thousands of approaches can be boiled down to just 6 principles, 6 psychological principles that can guide human behavior. These 6 principles, which I'll cover here in just a moment, the reason that they worked is they act as automatic triggers to guide subsequent behavior. In other words, when somebody encounters these 6 principles, they kind of serve as heuristics or shortcuts, which allow them to make a best guess about the proper course of action to take. And it also allows people to satisfy their most basic core motives. Those basic core motives are things like making accurate and efficient decisions. And again, we all have these basic core motives: making good decisions, gaining the approval of others, and we all desire to be seen in a positive light. So these principles really help us satisfy those motives, and that's one of the reasons that they help us. They help guide subsequent behavior. The first principle that I want to cover is the principle of liking. This research can be summarized quite neatly with this saying: people say yes to those they like. What makes someone like you? Well, we know that perceived similarities between someone and you is one of the reasons why people are drawn to you, or perhaps they like you. Another thing is praise and flattery. Everybody loves an attaboy or an attagirl, and whenever we receive or we offer praise and flattery, that tends to elicit a response of liking from others. It's why very sophisticated and successful managers often embellish others with high praise and flattery. So let's talk about how this principle may be applied in everyday life or in the workplace. One way that this can be applied is to, as a manager or as someone who wants to be liked, establish common ground between you and your counterpart. When you establish common ground between you and someone else, that literally draws that person closer to you. They see you as someone who is similar to them. The similarities can be done through establishing common ground over beliefs and values. If you're someone who has a certain political preference, when you meet and encounter other people with that same preference, you two are more likely to be drawn and like the other person. Also, specific attributes. It might be work ethic. It might be a passion for baseball. It can be a lot of different attributes that you say, you know what, that's a person who I find appealing because we share a lot of attributes in common. They can also be physical characteristics and proximity. There's great research on first encounters that suggests whenever we're at a cocktail party and we don't know a lot of people, after about 15 minutes, when we look around, we happen to be standing next to people who might look like us, be the same height as us, maybe dressed even similarly to us. It's one way that we can group ourselves based on physical characteristics, because we know that, hey, this is someone who's similar to me, therefore I must like this person. Other ways to apply it, specifically I'm going to talk about the workplace, is it's important to recognize others' good qualities and accomplishments. I can think back to my time as a retail store manager when I would have an employee who effectively worked with a customer, and when I would bring that employee to maybe a staff meeting or an all-hands meeting, and I would recognize that employee for doing an exceptional job, I could just tell it meant the world to that employee. It was something that was very important. What I didn't realize is they were actually liking me more as a manager, and that liking gave me the ability to, in turn, be more influential to them. They might be more willing to comply with a request either then or later on that I may have of them. It's also important when you're praising others to offer specific praise. Specific praise is more than just attaboy or attagirl. It can be something more like, look, I'm very proud of the way that you handled that customer. That was a really difficult and challenging customer, and you were very effective in the way that you communicated with her. I'm very proud of that. That specific praise just gives a little more substance to what you're trying to accomplish and can be even more effective as a tool to draw liking from that other person. It's also important that we use active listening. Active listening is genuinely showing people that you're listening to them. There's nothing more infuriating than when you're trying to talk to someone and they're on their smartphone or they're looking at their tablet or changing the channel on the TV. But active listening is eye-to-eye contact. It is affirmatively nodding when someone's speaking, and it is even oftentimes summarizing what they've just said. Maybe you stop and say, let me see if I understand you correctly. Your point of view is this. That's active listening and can really show someone that you're trustworthy, care, and a likable person. So what are some examples of this principle and how we might see it in everyday life? This principle is very effective in direct selling. The reason that direct sales organizations like Mary Kay, Pampered Chef, Amway, Tupperware are so successful is when somebody hosts a party, it's usually with friends, and friends like each other. And so when products are displayed, for instance, Pampered Chef kitchen products or Tupperware containers, sure, those products may be of good quality and appealing, but it's the emotional bond between friends that really can get someone to say, sure, I'll buy these products from you because I genuinely like you. You're one of my friends, and that liking is kind of willing me to say yes. Celebrity spokespersons. There is a good reason why Peyton Manning is on just about every commercial, from Nationwide Insurance to Papa John's Pizzas. He is someone who is highly regarded as a celebrity and as an athlete. People genuinely like him, and that likability allows him to be much more persuasive when trying to convince people to buy a pizza or sign up for a certain insurance plan. So again, savvy marketers are taking advantage of this principle to sway more people to their point. Let me give you a quick scenario of how this principle might appear in an organization. Imagine at your workplace that you have an adversarial relationship with another manager in a separate department, and this relationship is really hurting both of your respective departments. The research on praise points toward a strategy for fixing this relationship. It may be hard to find, but there has to be something about this other manager you can sincerely admire. Maybe it's her concern for her people in her department, or her devotion for her family, or maybe it's just her work ethic that you can genuinely admire. In your next encounter with her, make an appreciative comment about that trait. my guess is that appreciative and genuine compliment will make her like you more, and therefore, moving forward, you guys may have a softer, warmer relationship, and you may be able to actually be more influential to her. Again, people say yes to those they like. The second principle that science suggests is very influential when it comes to being persuasive is the principle of reciprocity. The science suggests that people repay in kind. So what makes someone give to you? We know from science that people are inclined to treat others in the same manner that they are treated. There's an inclination to repay for something received. Science suggests that give what you want to receive. That can be opportunities and risks. If you have an employee that you think, she might be a little new and a little untried in this organization, but I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and give her the opportunity to prove herself. Your willingness to give her a chance more than likely is going to create something in her where she wants to pay you back for that. It could be through loyalty, it might be through harder work, it might be through gratitude, or speaking of highly of you when she's talking to other people. Again, you showing a willingness to just take a risk and give her an opportunity creates in her some sort of obligation to reciprocate that willingness, that opportunity. Also, giving support and friendship is more than likely going to increase your ability to receive support and friendship from others. Taking the time to listen to somebody who's had a hard day, just giving them the opportunity to be heard out, more than likely is going to allow you to also be heard out later on if you need a friend or a shoulder to lean on. I did a research project that showed that when employees help out other employees who are struggling in an organization, oftentimes the supervisor, when they know that support and that willingness to help was received, they're much more inclined to give praise to that employee and even promotions and higher rewards and raises. So it might be that reciprocity rule is taking effect inside an organization. Science suggests you should also give when you want to receive. It can be things like a small token. There's a reason when you receive a Christmas card, you are often inclined to send a Christmas card back at that time of the year. When we receive something, we are likely to repay in kind at the same time or close to the same time. You can also be very generous and liberal with unsolicited acts. Giving employees small tokens, for instance, gifts, or even giving them a compliment. I know we talked about the liking principle, but giving them something like praise and flattery can oftentimes get them to return something more immediately in kind or something similar. Now, how does reciprocity manifest itself in everyday life? Well, think about it this way. The next time you're at a restaurant and your server brings you that leather portfolio with your bill in it, more than likely you're going to find an Andes candy or a mint with that bill. Well, guess what? Science shows that when you receive a mint, you're more likely to give a higher tip than if you hadn't received a mint. So that's an example of how you might see that every day. The other one that I get all the time is I get solicitations in the mail from organizations like the March of Dimes, where they will actually send me address labels. I didn't ask for these, but they come in the mail. And when I open that, research suggests that we are much more likely to then give a donation to these organizations. Why? Because we received something from them. And that compels us to then feel like we have an obligation to give back to them. So let me offer a scenario of where reciprocity may be effective in the workplace. Imagine you're a manager who has limited resources. I think we can all attest to that. Lending a member of your staff to a colleague who is shorthanded and staring at a fast approaching deadline will significantly increase your chances of getting help when you need it. So again, Taking the time, even though you have limited resources, to give a member of your staff to someone is going to mean a lot to that person. And more than likely, they're going to repay at a later point when you're facing a tight deadline too. Again, people repay in kind. The third principle I want to discuss is social proof. Scholarly work suggests that people follow the lead of similar others. What makes someone follow you in particular? People look for clues and cues on how to behave, think, and act. And social proof, in the form of what they see others do, often provide them with a textbook or a playbook on how to subsequently act. How should we apply this in our lives? An effective way is to use peer power whenever available. Peers are those, our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, people who we perceive as being similar or at the same level as us. And when we see people who are similar to us behaving in a certain way, well, that's a playbook, that's a textbook on how we should also behave. An effective implementation of this peer power comes when there are recommendations from coworkers, customers, neighbors, and similar others. Whenever I'm about to purchase a book on Amazon, the first thing I do is I want to know what the reviews are from other people who also read the book. In my mind, those are people who are similar to me because they were interested in this book, and their recommendation on that book greatly influences whether I purchase that book or not. The science behind this does show that horizontal influence is typically better than vertical influence. What I mean by that is our peers. People who are on the same level to us are often more trustworthy when a message is delivered about how to act. When social proof comes vertically, say for instance from a president, a CEO, or even a direct supervisor, we sometimes look at that message through a more skeptical lens. So again, it's people who are similar to us that have the most influence when creating social proof. Some examples of how social proof permeates in everyday life. Let's go back to the restaurant. Have you ever seen a menu that has a star next to it that says, this is our most popular item? Well, there's a reason that is there. Research in the restaurant industry and consumer behavior shows that as customers, we are greatly influenced by what other customers prefer. We will often ask our friends who have been to a restaurant, what did you buy? What did you order? What did you like? Again, that offers social proof and guides our subsequent behavior. I own an F-150, and I can promise you the reason that I own an F-150 is because I know it was America's #1 selling pickup truck for the past 25 years. Well, what that says to me is that other people who also like pickup trucks are inclined to purchase the Ford F-150. Well, that's proof enough for me to make that purchase. So that's an example of social proof. So here's a scenario of how that might work in an organization. Imagine you're trying to streamline your department's work processes. A group of grizzly veterans is digging their heels in, and they're resisting that new process. Rather than trying to convince the employees of the move's merits yourself, ask another veteran employee who does support your initiative to speak up for it at a team meeting. The compatriot's testimony stands a much better chance of convincing the group than yet another speech from you, the boss. Stated simply, influence is often best exerted horizontally rather than vertically. Again, people follow the lead of similar others. So show them what similar others are doing, and you'll be much more persuasive and influential. The fourth principle that I want to discuss is consistency. Research suggests that people align with their clear commitments. Now, what makes someone be consistent with those commitments? We know that once people make a stand or go on record for some position, they're more inclined to stick with it. How do we apply this? Well, it's important as an influencer, as a persuader, that we get commitments for others that cross three boundaries. The first one is that they're active. An example of that is getting a pledge from someone in writing or email. That pledge alone, once it's put on paper, becomes much more likely to be upheld than if it's just via words. Also, commitments that are voluntary. When I say voluntary, I mean on their terms, not coerced, are much more likely to be adhered to. If we try to wield a heavy stick and get people to do something that only we want to do through power or authority, they may go along with it, but it's not going to be something that they feel that they freely had a choice to do. And they'll be much more likely to withdraw from that request as soon as they can. The other thing that's important to do is get commitments that are public. As soon as people realize that others have noticed their commitments, well, then they're held accountable to those commitments. Again, commitments that are active, voluntary, and public are much more likely to be upheld. People want to be consistent with what they've agreed to do accordingly. Some examples of how this principle may show itself in our lives. As soon as you endorse a candidate, you're more than likely to be consistent with your endorsement. I know in the current political landscape we have seen some public withdrawals, but they're the exception, not the rule. Typically, if somebody puts their name on something or they endorse something, they're much more likely to stick to that endorsement than withdraw that endorsement. Also, have you ever been at home and you get a knock on the door and it's somebody canvassing the neighborhood asking you to sign a petition? Well, there's a good reason they're wanting you to sign it. As soon as you sign a petition for a cause, you're much more likely to support that cause. Here's where it gets complicated. As soon as you support a cause, when that cause comes back to you to ask you for more support, maybe a sign in your yard, maybe even a contribution or a donation of money, because you signed that petition, you're much more inclined to be consistent with that petition and go ahead and give that support or allow that yard sign to be placed. Again, we're going to adhere to these public commitments that we've made. Let me give you an example of a scenario of consistency. Let's suppose you want your employee to submit reports in a more timely fashion. You're trying to get her to kind of speed the process up. Once you believe you've won agreement from her, ask her to summarize the decision in a memo and then send it to you or in an email. By doing this, you'll have greatly increased the odds that she'll fulfill the commitment because, as a rule, people live up to what they have written down. Again, people align with their clear commitments, and that's the consistency principle. The fifth principle that I want to talk about is the principle of authority. What we know is that as decision makers, we often defer to the experts. People defer to experts. So what makes someone be persuaded by an expert? Well, experts are very valuable to us because they offer us a shortcut to making good, reliable, and efficient decisions. So how can we apply this principle? Well, make others aware of your skills or credentials. One of the biggest misconceptions is that we assume people often are aware of our skills and credentials. That's usually not the case. It sometimes takes us making them aware of our skills and credentials before they will comply with one of our requests. There's a reason when you go into the doctor's office, their medical degrees are on the wall. They openly display their medical degrees because it establishes their authority in medical matters. There's research in physical therapy that shows that when physical therapists fail to display their credentials, patients are much less likely to stick with physical therapy regimens and routines. However, when those credentials are displayed, they're much more likely to stick with the plan. Again, it's just something as simple as a degree framed on the wall. A lot of you may be thinking, look, I don't want to seem like a braggart by always talking about my expertise. I totally hear you, and I think that's wise because people who tend to brag are often less regarded. Oh, looks like we have a question. Yeah, Eliza?
David, a question is coming from Harris Ligon, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Generally speaking, are we biased towards sameness? Isn't social proof just another version of groupthink?
Yes. Well, that's a great question, Harris. Yes, we are biased. Before I answer the social proof and groupthink question, all of these principles do take advantage of our tendencies to evaluate information in a certain way. Again, I mentioned those motives that we want to satisfy, like making quick and efficient decisions, being seen in a positive light, affiliating with other people. Those motives are kind of baked in our natural tendencies to judge and evaluate information in a certain way. There are certain biases like, for instance, framing, the way that information is framed to us. For instance, a hamburger that is 85% lean is much more appealing to us than a hamburger that is 15% fat. Just the way that that information is framed can cause us to either purchase that hamburger or not, even though 85% lean and 15% fat are the same thing. It's just, it kind of, we fall trapped to our own biases and how things are framed. So the principle of social proof and groupthink, I mean, social proof is what are others doing at the same time, and I'm going to align my judgments accordingly. Groupthink is very similar to that, where you're in a group, you're in a team setting, and somebody voices their opinion. I'm much more inclined to agree with their opinion just because as somebody who I see as a peer, they have offered an opinion, and it's a very quick and efficient process for me just to go ahead and agree with that decision. We know that groupthink is biased, and it does take advantage of our tendencies to not want to speak up, to make quick and efficient decisions, and to question our own judgment. Groupthink has negative implications, and one of the things, Harris, that I'm going to talk about here at the end is using these persuasion and influence tactics in a positive, ethical, and benevolent way. Because we know that groupthink, as soon as somebody who's dominant, bold, and assertive states their position in a group setting, and it influences and sways others' opinions, well, from situations like the space shuttle Challenger tragedy, groupthink can be very detrimental and can harm. So it's important that whether you're a leader in a team setting or whether you're just a manager trying to persuade and influence, that you recognize the ramifications of your influence and that you're using it in a very benevolent, altruistic, and good way. But the short answer is yes, social proof and groupthink have a lot of overlap to them. Thanks for the question. So for those of you who are trying to assert your authority, one very clever way you can do it is through others. For instance, if Eliza introduces me in this webinar and talks about some of my accolade and accomplishments, it might have an actual softening effect and even more believability than if the camera turns on and I have to go over my own accomplishments and accolades. Just because I had a friend, a trusted companion, go over those attributes and accolades, you might think more favorably of me than if I had just sat here and kind of rambled them off myself, where you might have rolled your eyes and said, hey, give me a break. What's Dave talking about? So using others to highlight our accomplishments can be a very effective way to establish our authority. This goes back to the earlier slide where authority should be established delicately, accurately, properly, and definitely not through coercion. As soon as because I'm the parent, because I said so, because I'm the boss comes out, well, again, there's a negative withdrawal reaction that naturally occurs in others, and it's just not an effective way to establish authority. So what are some examples of how authority manifests itself in our lives? For those of you that are smokers, were smokers, or have seen a pack of cigarettes in the last 30 years, there's a label on that pack of cigarettes that says something like, the Surgeon General warns that smoking is bad for your health. The reason it doesn't say research or science or doctors, it says the Surgeon General, is in our minds, the Surgeon General is the authority figure on all health-related matters. And if the Surgeon General says that smoking is bad for our health, more than likely we're going to believe that and then make an informed decision about the merits of smoking and its effects on our own well-being. Let's go back to the restaurant again. I mentioned menus that list a star that say our most popular items. Well, restaurants are also very wise to use science to create menus with perhaps 2 stars or a dollar sign on them or a pepper that suggests this is the chef's recommendation. Well, if the chef recommends this entree, then definitely it must be the best one for me to choose, and therefore my decision is influenced based on that authority's recommendation. Let me give you a scenario where this authority principle may display itself at work. Just imagine for a second that you're trying to win over a new client. In your initial meetings with this client, perhaps lightly touching on your success with similar clients establishes you as an expert, and that can greatly increase your chances of winning their business. Again, people defer to experts, people defer to authorities, and this principle can then guide their subsequent behaviors as they try to make accurate and efficient decisions as well. Yep.
Before we move on, we have a couple of more interesting questions. Yeah. I always find these people, I think, are looking for some advice. Work situation, what do you do when a boss singles out a few of his leadership team as his buddies? What do you do when you're on the outside looking in? In other words, what do you do when there is bias?
Yeah, so do you mind repeating? I think I've got that question. Just to make sure I got it.
Work situation.
Okay.
What do you do when the boss singles out a few of his leadership team as his buddies? What do you do when you are on the outside looking in?
Yeah, so there's 2 things about this. Bosses who are well-read in the right way to manage their impressions and influence others are very careful not to create factions in the workplace by singling out a certain in-group and creating other people to feel like they're on the outside. However, that's in a perfect world that supervisors and bosses don't do that. They definitely have their buddies. They create their in-group. They play favorites. So these things happen. So as somebody who is on the outside looking in, these principles are definitely ways that you can work your way into the in-group. Let's use the liking principle, for example. Finding something about your boss who you probably have a less favorable opinion of at this point for creating these factions and in-groups. Genuinely finding a positive quality about your boss and communicating that positive quality to your boss can in turn open you up to somebody that this boss may consider also part of the in-group. Hey, look, this is an employee who is kind and respectful and sees my good qualities. Therefore, he or she must also be somebody who is valuable in this organization or this team. And they might actually welcome you into their in-group for such. Again, I wouldn't recommend that as a boss that you create factions and in-groups, but it does happen, and some of these tactics can actually be applied to kind of help circumnavigate some of those problems. It's a good question.
We have another one from Christine, and if I understand it correctly, she's talking about how do you determine the line between bragging and what is the information people need? That those things change within various cultures and organizations. Do you have suggestions on how to identify where that line is?
So sure. So there's a really interesting new line of research that has been labeled humble bragging, which is when people intentionally try to use self-deprecation and humility as a way to brag. Let me give you an example. A Facebook post that says something like, 23 miles this morning and my legs are killing me. Now I got to go ice down for the rest of the day. Well, think about that. They are trying to draw attention to the fact that they are in pain and having to ice because they ran 23 miles. It is a very sneaky, indirect way to self-promote themselves, to establish themselves as an authority or an expert by trying to couch that authority and expertise in a self-deprecating or humble way. Well, what the research is showing is that is an ineffective way to do it. We as social observers see through those attempts. So here's my suggestion. When you genuinely have credentials and skills that are important to accomplishing a mission, a doctor, if you are someone who has a title where that title can be relevant in a certain situation, openly communicate that. When I introduce myself at the beginning of the semester to my students, I actually highlight my credentials. Some of my accomplishments, not only in academia, but in the real world, because I want them to see me as both a scholar, somebody who understands the topic and can communicate it, and also someone who has applied it, whether at Home Depot or in leadership positions as a mission commander in the Navy or a store manager or a general manager with Home Depot. Again, I'm very open about that. But the situation warrants me communicating that. For me, just in a normal conversation, if I met you for the first time, to talk about my degree or my accolades in the military or what I accomplished in retail would seem very awkward and forced and unnecessary. So be open about it when the situation warrants. And that will help you avoid stepping over that line.
Let's take one more question on the subject of authority before we move on. What is the best approach to influence somebody in authority to listen, not just hear something that does not fall within groupthink? Example, 8 people fall into groupthink and you disagree, but the person in authority feels passionate about the position and backs it up with all the experience from the past.
So another great question, and the reason that these are really cool questions is what we now know, these 6 principles that we've been discussing, and I know we haven't gotten through all 6 yet, but the principles that we are discussing are most effective when they're used in combination with each other. So if you have an authority who is dominating a position and asserting a position, instead of trying to match that authority who clearly has an entrenched position in what they think is right, in fact, my guess is this authority is adhering to the consistency principle, the commitment principle, because they have staked their claim, they have stated their ground, and now they're going to see their position all the way through to the end. That might be an interesting time for you to work on perhaps offering social proof. I don't know if in this scenario you can get the time to get maybe some other people to agree with your position, but instead of just you trying to combat the authority's position, imagine if a cadre of you were also trying to state the same position or to offer a rebuttal. Instead of just an adversary, a one-person adversary, it's harder to disregard a team of people offering you evidence that there may be a different way to look at a problem. So not only using these tools in different contexts, but using them in conjunction with others. Finding genuine similarities between you and this person to draw you closer, and then offering social proof. A combination of strategies may work. Question. So we talked about the menus that the chef special is definitely a way to that authority figures can influence our decisions. The 6th principle I want to talk about is the principle of scarcity. People want more of what they can have less of. When there are fewer of the resources available, it creates a sense of urgency in us to acquire those resources before they run out. So what makes someone be persuaded by scarcity? Items and opportunities are definitely seen as more valuable as they become less available. I have a picture of a solar eclipse up there. I've got it on my calendar. Next August 2017 is going to be the first time that a solar eclipse is visible in this part of the country since the early 1980s. That is an amazing, rare, unique phenomenon that occurs. I've got it on my calendar, and I guarantee I will be standing outside with my cardboard box and my aluminum foil viewer trying to see that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when it comes around. It's scarce and it's very valuable to me. How is this principle applied? Well, scarcity, when you're thinking about an offer that you're making someone, it should be framed as exclusive. This is a one-time deal. Unique. This is something new. This is something novel. This is something that you might not have seen before. And also it's important to frame offers as what will be gained, but also, and maybe even more importantly, what will be lost if you don't capitalize on this unique proposition. Let me give you some examples of this principle that you've may seen in your lives. Hurry while supplies last. If you're ever in a supermarket or even shopping online and you see this is a limited time deal only for the next 24 hours, the first 10 callers, those are all applications of the scarcity principle, which is trying to create inside of you a sense of urgency to strike while you can, to take advantage of this opportunity before it all runs out. Another example that we're seeing more and more of is as we move toward making airline reservations exclusively online, you may see ticket pricing that says only 2 tickets remain at this price, or if purchased 3 weeks in advance. These are all examples of scarcity, which is, again, trying to compel us to go ahead and click purchase before these very few seats run out. Let me give you a scenario of the scarcity principle that you might see inside your organization. Imagine you're a manager and you come into possession of information that's not broadly available, and it supports an idea or initiative you would like the organization to adopt. The next time, when you get a hold of that organization, you should round up your key employees, some of the key team members in your organization. The information itself, it might be dull and not too interesting, but when you couch it in exclusivity, it will give it a special sheen. Perhaps you might want to push it across your desk and say something like this: I just got this report today. It won't be distributed until next week, but I want to give you an early look at what it shows. Then you can watch as your team members start to lean forward because they know they're going to get something that's quite rare and unique. Again, people want more of what they can have less of, and that's the scarcity principle. So let me tie this up. Our ability to be successful at persuasion and influence depends on really 3 things: creating the right context, being ethical, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about that, and creating the right impression. Let me hit that first point first. Creating the right context. Gaining the attention and focus of others is very important when you're trying to use some of these strategies to influence others. Let me give you an example of something that may gain the attention and focus of others. If you want feedback from someone, if you approach them and you ask for their advice, the word advice is much more effective than asking simply for their opinion. Advice signals something of value, that they are an expertise who can give you something that benefits you. An opinion is something that everybody has and doesn't necessarily signal that they are experts and that the information that they are willing to take the time to communicate is of value. Just a simple sleight of phrase or a twist of words like that can really draw focus to the situation, and they're probably going to be more inclined not only to give you feedback, but to give you good feedback, something that you can use. It's important to be ethical when you're attempting to persuade and influence others. I really kind of harp on this, that using these strategies and principles is only going to be effective when you are genuinely trying to be benevolent, you have goodwill, and you have no intent to harm others. Yes, using these principles in unethical or abusive ways can be effective in the short term. But we know from research that these definitely will not be effective in the long term. Look, it's the ethical way, the honest way is always going to be the right approach. But we even know from science that using benevolence and using ethicality when applying these principles is very pragmatic. It has a long-term positive net gain. I experienced this firsthand when I was in retail at Home Depot. I used the strategy of scarcity to get my customers to sign up for branded Home Depot credit cards. So I would say things like, today only, if you sign up for a Home Depot credit card, you will get $50 off your purchase. And that created a sense of urgency in them to go ahead and sign up for the card. But what I found is as soon as they signed up for the card and got the $50 off, they were throwing those cards away. They were cutting them up. They weren't using them long term, which is the intent of a branded credit card, that the customer comes back and uses that card over and over again in purchase. So 6 months, a year later, when I would see reports that my store was in last place with sales on Home Depot branded credit cards, it looked bad on me. And people were it was very obvious that I had used some sort of trick in my tactics to get people to sign up for the cards, even though it wasn't in their best interest long term to use those cards. So again, short-term gains, long-term costs if these things aren't used ethically and honestly. So the example I say is, an example I use is suddenly trying to help a friend and then immediately asking for a favor in return can seem quite sneaky. But generously and openly giving to a friend, and then maybe later on in life seeking some sort of reciprocation, can be a lot softer and more effective. Success also is about creating the right impression. According to scholars, how you are viewed by others can often affect how well you are liked and whether you are seen as competent and committed. And here's what I have in bold with this quote: the rewards you receive and how quickly you get ahead in an organization. Being a leader, being able to apply these strategies of influence and persuasion in the right way not only impacts your impression, but it can give you a leg up when it comes to getting ahead in your organization, bonuses, promotions, and rewards. So let me tie up with just a few takeaways. We now know, because we've covered it, that there is a science to influence and persuasion. There's 6 core principles that we can apply in our everyday life, even at work, to be more influential. When these strategies are used properly, like ethically, and in the right context, it can be effective in getting people to comply with our message. Again, success depends not only on context, but in being used in ways that others see as favorable, and not, for instance, as bragging or as trickery. All right, thank you very much. That is what I have. I've listed here some of the citations that support this research. So I do want to communicate that I am always glad and willing to help any organization who wants to specifically address how can we use some of these strategies in the context of my group, my organization, my neighborhood, or my association. Again, I would be glad to partner with you and work with you if you'd like to contact me and reach out for me. And I'm always looking for good partners to collaborate on teaching, mentoring, training, and research. So use me as a resource, and I would love to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Long, and thank you to all of our alumni who chose to spend another lunch hour with us, or coffee or cocktails, depending on where you are in the world. We appreciate it, and as always, we will send out the PowerPoint and follow up with you and information about the next webinar. Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Professor Long, and thank you for the team who are behind the scenes making this happen, Mike and Karen.